Welcome to Thursday, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 139. How is everyone today? In our work, we work with people that are globally mobile, moving across countries for professional reasons, obviously well supported, well taken care of, and often quite voluntary, but that's not always the case. There are many people in a long history of this world that have been displaced through not of their choice. And we're going to talk to someone today, a wonderful teacher of ours in the intercultural field who has brought that experience and that knowledge and turned it into a business where she supports people that do the same. And we're very honored to have her, and stick around. It's going to be a great chat. Yes, indeed. Welcome, sir. How are you? And if you will indulge me, I'm going to have to, I know we're live. This is live TV, folks, straight to air. I'm going to have to change the batteries in my microphone.
Well, that's what it's going to be. So go ahead and do that. Will we see you in different states of undress as you do it, or can
No. Not batteries in me. I'm energized. I'm talking about the microphone.
Well, then I'll just ramble on a little bit while you. Everybody, this is episode 139 of Two Chaps, Many Cultures. It is, as always, the show of the business of culture and the culture of business. And as Brett said, our guest today has been or is still a lovely teacher of many of us in the intercultural field. I would argue if you are working in our field somehow in coaching, training, facilitation, education in the intercultural field, then you may have come across this wonderful lady who's been, I would say, one of the, I hope I'm not butchering this by saying it this way, but she's one of the grandes dames of the intercultural field, and I am tickled pink that she is joining us today from, I think, from Chicago. Welcome, Two Chaps. Tatyana Fertelmeyster. How are you doing, Tatyana?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys?
Well, we're humbled by your presence.
Absolutely. And Tatyana and I are only like 10 minutes from each other. You should have come over. We could have had tea, Tatyana. We could have had
10 minutes and the whole pandemic in between.
Well, welcome.
Well,
Thank you.
I as the teacher of many of our colleagues, so I think that's not an exaggeration. I think I know personally more than a handful of people who went through some of your courses to up their game in our industry. You're such a sought-after guru that people go to. What makes Tatyana the wonderful Tatyana that she is?
Couple of things. There is a very interesting assessment that looks at your character strengths, and it is done by Weir Institute, and they measure 24 characters that you have, and I've taken it a few times, and my up 5 change. The very first one remains, and that's a sense of humor. So I come from the culture of Russia and the former Soviet Union when we survived through making anything into a joke, so that's one. And also coming from the same culture, it's a culture that tends to give a lot of unsolicited advice. So I'll probably give you some advice whether you ask for it or not. And maybe, as I grow wiser, I maybe give a little bit of a better advice over time.
So did I hear this correctly when you say Russia is a culture that is humorous because humor helps dealing with all the uncertainties of life, but you also said you are from a culture that gives unsolicited advice. Is that also a character trait of many Russians?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can find it in many collective cultures. I take it on as, I'm from culture of Russia. the care is shown through, assuming that you probably don't know what you are doing as far as I haven't given you an advice. I am also Jewish, and intersection of these two cultures probably makes my preference for giving advice even stronger. So the care, yeah.
Is there a cascade or a hierarchy of who gets to give advice first? Is it age, or is it education, or does anyone in Russian culture feel that they have to give advice to each other?
I think it comes with relationship. Friendships are at high esteem in Russia, and caring for your friend by giving advice is often the thing. Age plays a role in it. There is at least some degree of respect that is shown to, somebody who is older. So we give advice, but also Russia changed tremendously since I left it more than half of my life ago.
Right.
And so it might very well be that the reality of advice giving, friend support, and wisdom sharing operates differently right now.
Well, you've done this advice giving, but in a professional sense, a real professional sense, and as Christian said, you have a position in our field that is well deserved for your ability to give advice, both with humor and intention. And so let's dig into that story. The story, you say, obviously you have an accent like we do, and we get asked where we're from, and you do that. And also when we're doing this work, I guess we bring our story to it just to frame our experiences, right? So your experience is very different to, I'd say, Christian and I's, where I literally tell people, there are people say to me, oh, you moved countries, or what a brave thing to do. I said, you understand that I got off a plane and got picked up by a black car, right? This is not exactly, I had it pretty easy. But for other people, many, many people in this world, that's not true, and maybe not true of yours. So if you could just share us to whatever level you're comfortable, what was that experience of moving for you, being displaced? Yeah.
Okay. And I'm so glad that you are sharing your experience, and you address the fact that other people might have a different experience, because psychologically, and thanks to our multiple cognitive biases, we often tend to kind of over project our own experience on others and expect that we understand what people are talking about because we've been through something that possibly looks like that. And immigration process and coming to another culture where you will be living for a while or settling in is so diverse in its reality that is just amazing. It's diverse in what are the legal terms that we use? What's the difference between an immigrant and expat and refugee and somebody who is on some temporarily work arrangement or foreign student? What is it when you come to another country because you are a spouse of its citizen, or you cross the border hoping for the best? So there are all sorts of different ways and reasons for which people cross countries. The reality of, oops, I'm now in the unfamiliar place and I need to figure out my way around it, definitely happens for any of us who kind of end up in a new place. But to what degree we are supported, for what lengths of time we are supported, and in what way, and how we are perceived by people around us can be hugely different. So the way my family and I came to the United States at the time when my kids were 2 and 6, we came here as refugees.
Mhm.
Being in a country where women are not supposed to be asked about their age, I'm not telling you how old I was when I came here, but my kids are now 34 and 38.
Mhm.
So if you went to school where you were supposed to count quickly, you will now know what I'm talking about. We came here as refugees from it was still the Soviet Union when we came here, because we are Jewish. And in Russia, being Jewish was not seen as your religious choice. It was seen as your nationality written in your passport. And a lot of barriers were put in place by the government. Talk about systemic, anti-Semitism, and a lot of just interpersonal interactions could have been rather anti-Semitic depending on whom you are interacting with. So talk about, person to person experiences. Waves of Jews came to the United States over history, from Russia and Eastern Europe, starting with the end of 19th century and pogroms. And so we came as a part of one of those waves right at the time when Gorbachev came to power soon after that, and kind of made it easier for people to live. Also, when you are a refugee, you don't understand it, you don't recognize it, but you are very much a little piece in a big political game. At the time when we were leaving the Soviet Union, the big political game in the United States was putting pressure on the Soviet Union to let Soviet Jews out. And all kinds of sanctions were put in place to push for that. By the time we actually made it to kind of a middle stage in Europe, where we were waiting for our documents to be processed in Italy, the situation changed. Now, the Soviet Union obviously was letting people out. It stopped being an important political game. And all of a sudden, a lot of people got stuck in limbo, got stuck in Italy there, because they could not go back to the Soviet Union. One of the things we had to do was to give up our citizenship and pay some money on the top of it, so we would get a stateless person exit visa. And American Congress at the same time was having discussions about, do we still have to let them in as refugees? There is certain cost that exists for any country to accept anybody else as refugees. Gorbachev seems to be letting them out. So when I was there, and we were lucky, we got through, but I know people who got stuck there for like 9 months, 10 months. There's a whole cemetery in this part of Italy around Ladispoli, where people who didn't make it through this limbo were buried. And later on, I read this, you can find anything on the internet now, you can read this discussion about should we or should we not put money into it. Yeah. So my experience of coming to the United States. Say it again.
Sorry to interrupt. I have a quick question, because I know during that time in the late 80s, early 1990s, when the Warsaw Pact slowly collapsed and people moved into other parts of the world, did you and your family have a choice whether you come to the US or to another country? Because a lot of Eastern European Jews moved to France, moved to Belgium, moved to Germany, of all places. So Did you have a choice, or was that set?
We had a choice of either going to Israel, as any Jew always has that choice to go, or to come to the United States. We decided to go to the United States because that's where my then husband had his real relatives. So we knew that there will be people to kind of accept us, sponsor us, and help us figure out the way around. Different people made different choices in this process, definitely. So when we came here, my very first job was a few months into the process to become a resettlement worker for people who were coming from the same country that I came from, and helping others to figure things out. One of my favorite stories of that time, in Chicago, there is this street that's called Devon Avenue, and that's where the office I was working at was located. And a lot of people were settling around there. And I had that elderly couple, and I asked them, have you been to downtown Chicago? What have you seen? And they said to me, we haven't been to America yet. We are here on divans all the time. Yeah, so your sense of what America is, or country you enter, and what is your place in it, what is your community in it, is always fascinating. Yeah. And there is this whole super interesting theory or model that I work with a lot, and it helps me understand a lot of things. That was put together by Dr. John Barry, and it's called acculturation strategy model. And it looks at our openness, me as a person or my group, the openness to change and adjust and become a part of, and what kind of an environment we are acculturating into. Do we experience it as open to taking us in, friendly, or do we experience it as kind of, be like us or else? Yeah. And depending on that, there are 4 strategies: separation, assimilation, marginalization, and integration. Yeah. Integration is definitely the best place, where I am willing and able to change, and the place I am adjusting to is open to me kind of taking time.
Right.
Marginalization is the scariest place, because that's where I'm not able to change. I want things to go just the way I am expecting them. And society is not necessarily, either for real or in my perception, is open to me being, what I am and how I want to be. And this corner, the marginalization corner, plays out very strongly in, for some immigrant groups, for some refugee groups. For example, a few years ago, we know there were a bunch of Somali teenagers who were so radicalized that they went back to Somalia, and some of them went back to Syria to be kind of a part of the war there. Their parents were very busy trying to build the life here, and expecting that kids will just kind of be kids and do their own thing. Kids were not very accepted. And radicalizing somebody who feels not accepted and saying, come over here, I will like you just the way you are, works really well in this situation. And if I take it a little further from how immigrant groups operate, or refugees, or those who are not from here, I see radicalization of young white men in America right now going along exactly the same line. I want to be the way I am, and I'm not going to make any changes. And I am experiencing the society as changing in a way that I don't like, I don't think I fit. And somebody will come and say, I love you just the way you are. And let me tell you why you should be, the most important creature of them all. And that happens very easily and very quickly. So how we acculturate into another country, into another reality of our own country, into a new workplace, into a new family when we get married, pretty much strategies are the same. And the other two strategies, just to address them briefly, separation is about the door is open, but I'm not comfortable going through it. Maybe I don't know the language. Maybe I didn't want to be here in the first place. We see separation in immigrant experience, especially older people who are not comfortable with it. You can be an expat spouse in the middle of some wonderful place, but you didn't want to be there. You don't like the way things are going, you don't like the way, the street looks, and you would rather stay here in your own place. I work a lot with expats who come here, and I remember talking to a young woman who came here from Mexico, and she spoke good English. Her husband was working. He was the employee who was brought to this company, to work. And for 6 months, she was sitting in her apartment waiting for things to finally start working out for her. So that's the separation in its kind of purest form. And assimilation is something that most often we see among kids. Immigrants often talk about their kids that they want to be more American than Americans are. Here in the United States, I'm sure that they want to be more German than Germans are. In Germany, there is something about a young kid who wants to be accepted and wants to be like them all. And for younger kids, it often works. For older kids, for teenagers, it doesn't necessarily work that easily. So there's a lot of complexity in it.
Which brings me to the question: you were a young mother when you came as a refugee, and chances are, and I'm letting my assumptions speak, right? And you please slap me into my lane again, please. But my assumption is that Eastern Europe, if you're Jewish and from Eastern Europe, you're Ashkenazi most likely, right? And the Ashkenazi Jewish people have been dispersed throughout Europe for generations. So they have, that's my assumption, learned to adjust quickly to new circumstances because they had to. There was pressure for them to do so. And there is a big diaspora around the world, whether it be Sephardic or Ashkenazi. So was it easier for you, or did it help you particularly to find relatives or a Jewish community in the US, or did that help not at all?
Being Jewish in the Soviet Union was a very interesting experience to begin with. I am a granddaughter of grandparents on both sides who grew up in what was called Pale of Settlement. When Russian Empire took over a chunk of Polish territory, and with it brought a lot of Jews into this, Russian Empire. Russian merchants were not very happy about it, and they asked Catherine the Great to protect them from competition. And Catherine the Great drew the line on the map and said, no Jew crosses this line going into Russia proper unless they change their religion and become Russian Orthodox.
Oh, wow.
So the Pale of Settlement fell down in 1917 at the time of the revolution. After that, the Soviet Union, including its Jewish population, lived through the time of Stalin's repressions, lived through World War II, lived through massive graves of Jewish people in Ukraine and Belarus, you know, that was especially because that's what was taken by, you know, the German army.
Mhm.
So how people were adjusting, and then in right after Israel was formed,
Yeah.
Stalin became very and that was soon after the war ended. Yeah, Stalin became very concerned about loyalty of Jewish people, because now they kind of had another state to be loyal to. Jews were then seen as a fifth column.
Mhm.
And Stalin had all kinds of plans for really massive deportation of Jews, the same as Chechens were massively deported. Germans of Volga region were massively deported. Stalin's death in 1953 saved people from these massive deportations, didn't save people from anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism was alive and well and growing and kind of becoming more and more policy of the state, unspoken and unwritten policy of the state. How people adjusted to it was very, very different. You know, some people kind of expressed their religious affiliation, sort of went underground with it. Other people were not practicing their religion, you know, so identifying themselves as Jewish in various ways. So coming here, in that sense, was an interesting experience, because Jewish community of the United States and different places in the United States had been very enthusiastic about, you know, our people are coming, the whole campaign, let us, you know, let my people go.
Mhm.
And they had all kinds of unrealistic expectations about who is and that you see it between any new group of people and existing diaspora.
Mhm.
Whether it is, you know, people of Jewish descent, people of Mexican descent, people of German descent, whatever the descent is.
You didn't fit the expectation, basically. They expected you to be like they were in the diaspora and had been for decades, and now you come from a Soviet Russian anti-Semitic Jewish experience and not fitting into the mold that they had prepared for you.
The difference here is, like, for example, as a German person who moved here himself, you might be looking at some other German person who comes 30 years from now, and you have certain expectations based on your experience, yeah, which still will be different. In our case, we were dealing with the community of Jewish people whose grandparents often were the ones who came here.
Yeah.
So the expectation of how we should be was very much based on how their grandparents were. Yeah, I remember giving a lecture once to a group of people in the Jewish Community Center. They came, they were very interested in kind of conversation about immigrant experience, and I was talking to them about it, and one of them said, you know, but what I don't understand is when my grandparents came and they were ready to take on any job that was available, and my grandfather, you know, became, you know, started his work as a shoemaker almost immediately. And I said to her, I very much understand what you're talking about. And that was very much a reality. And people who come now are willing to make all kinds of changes as necessary. And you also need to understand that my husband, who came here with me as an engineer, the only part in his body that is trained to work is his brain. And so making a shoemaker out of him probably would not work. Yeah.
Well, we make good shoes, let's put it that way.
Yeah, though we know that a lot of people who come from other countries, especially who come here as refugees, political asylum seekers, or undocumented immigrants, yeah? People who come here because they feel that it's not a choice, do I want to go this way or that way or what else I want to do? It really is, you have to make this move to survive. Yeah, there is no way back. One of the realities of that group is that people are indeed willing to take on all kinds of jobs, yeah, unless it is somebody who is in marginalization and it's like my way or highway. People take on all kinds of jobs. And you know, and I know even more so, how many highly educated cab drivers we have, how many highly educated hotel cleaners we have, and all sorts of other low-paying jobs that people take, especially when language is an issue. Yeah? Let me tell you a little bit of a story that is not mine, but the story of American meatpacking industry. Yeah? American meatpacking industry was doing really well for a long time, employing a lot of undocumented immigrants.
Right.
Because the job is so hard, environment is so difficult to be in, that hardly anybody will say, out of many choices I have available to me, why don't I go and work as a meat packer? Yeah. So then immigration rules and kind of following the rules that on the books became more strict. And there were all kinds of raids, and there were all kinds of problems that companies had to pretty much pay their way out. And then, for example, in Illinois, I know that they decided that the next best thing was to go to Puerto Rico and recruit people from there. It was at the time when unemployment in Puerto Rico was quite high, and they were successful in bringing a lot of people in. Now it was significantly more expensive for the company because you have to move people that you recruited, you have to move the whole family. And 6 months into it, they had almost no people left working for them, because Puerto Ricans have the same American passport, which gives them all kinds of choices of employment. Yeah. And people are looking for places where the work is maybe not as harsh and money maybe is better, or at least the work environment is. So they ended up without much people again. And then meatpacking industry in Illinois and in many other places discovered the best thing ever. They discovered refugees, because as a refugee you have legal right to work immediately. Yeah? They discovered refugees who were coming from lots of troubled places in the world, from many places in Africa, especially some also from Asian countries and from Latin America. And they were very much looking for groups of people where educational level will be lower, where people quite often, were maybe pre-literate in their own language, which definitely means that learning English will be significantly higher than for somebody who is educated in their own language. So they will employ these people. They will find a few people in the same community, maybe younger people who spoke English, and they make them supervisors. They will provide van transportation or something like that. And it made these people to be most loyal, sustainable workforce. Because on one hand, here is a job and I bring money home. On the other hand, where else will I go, because I'm still not speaking English. We know how much meat packing industry was affected by COVID.
Right. Globally. Yeah.
But we had practically no conversation anywhere about who are the people who work in these meat packing factories. Why is it that they live in communities that are so socially connected and so packed and so kind of collective in their sense that virus was spreading in the community very, very quickly. And it's easy to overlook it because they're kind of not like us, you know.
Yeah, we don't have to care as much about them, right?
And that is the reality of our meat packing industry.
Well, it is also the reality, the perpetuated reality for refugee communities right now. We're dealing it where you give the example of meat packing industry in times of a pandemic, but hasn't that always been the case, unfortunately, for a lot of these refugee communities, no matter where they are in the world? We look at Europe, we look at the ongoing refugee crisis that happens in Europe. You look at these islands in Greece and in southern Italy where they're forced to live in conditions that you wouldn't even want your dog to live like that, and yet we are cramming them in these camps.
So far, I've been talking to you about refugee experience that has a happy ending of resettlement. Yeah? When you end up settling in another place. For most of the refugees who are in somewhere in the world today, they are in limbo. They are in the middle. There is a statistic by UN, and that's prior to pandemic. I don't know what is the statistic now, that on average it takes 17 years of being in the refugee camp or some in between kind of arrangement. We have people coming to the United States sometimes as refugees whose children managed to learn 2 or 3 languages on the way because they were sitting in refugee camps in one country, then in another country, you know. So, and nobody knows yet how do you legally classify a child who was born in a refugee camp. Because they, according to definitions that exist now, they didn't have their own experience of running out. And so you might be born and celebrate your 18th birthday, which is kind of majority age globally, more or less, and doing all of that within the refugee camp.
Wow.
And what is your culture then?
Yeah.
What is the culture from which you are adjusting to another culture?
Wow.
Yeah. So those...
Yeah, that's almost like another nation, right? It's a cultural identity. It's a citizenship. It's a citizenship without an official citizenship, that experience. So, and I guess that when you're confronted with people, and you know, in the countries that are very wealthy and people have say that I've worked hard for everything I've got, and so these refugees are coming and they're taking over. They're using that privilege, but you're defending their privilege by saying, well, I worked hard for mine. It's, you know, through the sense that we're saying you've got privilege, and they're being defensive by thinking we're talking about their lack of ability to work hard. That's not it. It's about the privilege of growing up and being born in a place where you don't have to have this experience, where the movement is a sheer action of survival. A pure action of survival. And so you cannot possibly, you know, as I say, in all our work that we come across people that are marginalized and separated, we cannot ever understand. I mean, I can't ever understand that experience. I can't. You know, it's not something we can tap into. So, but it is this that us and them. The reason they're coming is because they didn't work hard enough back in their own country and make their money. Well, no, there's actual Yeah, and that's a devastating statistic. 17 years average of movement. That's over a quarter of a life of the lifespan. And in the refugee camps, I'm sure the lifespan is much lower than an affluent society.
Absolutely. But also, if you think about dealing with immigrants and refugees from the perspective of superiority, supremacy of being local versus somebody who is coming in. If you look at the history of, let's just take the United States, and I'm sure other countries can look at their own timeline, but the United States that proclaims itself, and now with two-day-old administration wants to reclaim itself as a country of immigrants, you can have the economic kind of timeline of the United States that goes in waves. We're doing well, we're not doing well. And you will see the immigration wave very much in parallel. We're growing, we need to build railroads, let's bring some Chinese from the West, let's bring some Eastern Europeans from the East, let's put some Mexicans in the middle, we're building the railroad. We're done with the railroad. We kind of are not in a good economic place right now. Let's have Chinese Exclusion Act. Let's have, this, that, and all kinds of other limitations. When the mindset of those who have arrived and settled becomes that of, you are a function of my life, rather than you have your own life and agency over your own life, and you put the agency of your own life to the service of this country the best way you can, with a reasonable expectation that that will allow you to have a better life for your children, because that's what's driving most of the people. We are definitely people go through these processes as single people, as just couples without children. But somewhere there, it is always about, I'll make it here, I'll be sending money home, or I will be here, I'll have it very hard, but my kids will have it better. Some years ago, Paris was on fire. Algerian community, young people of the Algerian community, were kind of setting all sorts of stuff ablaze.
Yes.
Because every Algerian who came to France was willing to make all kinds of sacrifices. They didn't plan on sacrificing their children. Their children, the expectation was, forget about me, but my children will be French people living, when we push the community in marginalization, or we expect a complete assimilation, become like us, forget anything else. It's a very tricky thing what happens. People deserve to live with the sense of decency. People deserve to live with the sense of making something possible for their children. Let me tell you a little bit of a story that happened for me when I was doing diversity work in a local office of a very big American corporation. It was in California, and my colleague and I, an African-American woman, my colleague and I, came there to do the whole day diversity training. The company was getting all of their managers all over the place through the same one-day training. So we came there. We walked into the room. We kind of ended up calling them 12 angry white men, because they were all sitting around one big table. They were all white, of different age. This story has a happy ending. At the end of the day, they were hugging us on the parking lot. So it's, But in the very beginning, when we first just started introducing the idea, there was this one guy, he was probably the oldest in the group, maybe around 60. He said, all this diversity stuff, it's all well and good, but tell me, why is it that my daughter, who was, born and grown here, she's an American, she is a California native, and she worked hard to get herself through the college education. She's a teacher, and she cannot find a job because she doesn't speak Spanish. What's wrong with this picture? And I said to him, that's when you go into full-blown empathy instead of trying to convince somebody that they're wrong and you're right. And I said, the way you're talking about it, it sounds for me that's not just your daughter who worked very hard. You probably worked very hard as well to support her through her growing up, through her learning, and that really it feels very, very bad for you right now that results of your work are not showing up in her ability to find a job. He said, yes. I said, that makes you very responsible and caring parent. So let me ask you, if you found yourself in the situation, let's say life circumstances worked out differently, and you found yourself in a situation where you need to grab your family and move as quickly as you can in some different place because where you are is not safe, is not really workable for your family, would you do that? He said, absolutely. I said, okay, now you are in a place that feels safer and you don't speak the language of this place. Will you take on any hard physical job that you can do without much language? He said, yes, no question. I said, okay, now you worked the whole long day in that job. You come back home. You're very tired. How much of your brain is available to study a local language? He said, not much. And he still, and I said, it doesn't take away the fact that you are justifiably concerned and unhappy. All of us want the best for our children and the maximum success. But can we understand the human reality of the other human being and what it takes for them? And why is it that they don't bother to learn our language and make our life more difficult this way, when indeed there is this very, very real reality? And our economy, follow the money, our economy very much depends on the significant presence of people who every day are willing to go out and do essential work today in the situation of pandemic, knowing that they don't have a right to work, they don't have any access to medical care, they are not getting any government support in the form of any stimulus check or whatever. So it's okay for us and do essential work, but it's not okay for us that you will get any kind of support for it. So now, as we are going into, I would say probably we can expect a very spirited discussion about immigration reform that the administration is proposing, that whether it will be spelled out or it will be in the back of the mind, but a lot of this fight will be about, are we willing to pay more for produce in our stores? Are we willing to kind of all of a sudden get 11 million people who now have a right to choose and decide and maybe have some freedom of saying no to the hardest jobs or hardest kind of circumstances of these jobs? Are we willing to do that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We still have people and very responsible people in their positions here in the United States talking about slavery being evil, but necessary evil, that American greatness needed to be built, and slavery was a necessary evil of that. In many ways, reality of undocumented immigrants in the United States and in many other countries in the world is this unspoken necessary evil.
Right.
And are we willing to deal with it in a way that it needs to be dealt with? Are we willing to reshare the sacrifice a little bit in terms of paying more for something, or having more competition for jobs? Or do we kind of say, oh yeah, this is just necessary evil, and somebody has to do these jobs, and somebody has to say yes to things that I don't want my child to say yes to?
Yeah.
Now you're describing the everyday unspoken evils or evil symptoms of displacement. In your personal experience, did you eventually? How did you find yourself belonging? At which point did you know, or have you ever reached that point where you said, okay, I've completed this process for me and my family, and now I feel like I belong here?
Belonging happens over time, and belonging also, you cannot belong to the country. There is a wonderful TED talk, and I am blocking the name of the woman who is doing it. But the name of this TED talk is "Don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm local." That we belong to places, we belong to people, we belong to communities, we belong to something that has meaning for us, and we may have meaning for it. What does it mean to belong to the country? If I belong to the country in every, then I belong to the groups that were rioting the Capitol building. Okay. And I belong to all sorts of other things, yeah? I live in the country, I'm a citizen of the country, I'm very passionate about the country that has this complexity of riots, of on the Capitol building, and Black Lives Matter protests, and everything in between and around. Yeah, I belong to that reality, and I need to find my place in this reality and figure out where I stand. Yeah, and it's a separate conversation how people who come here as immigrants or refugees, how do we decide where we belong politically? How do we decide where we put our vote when we get the right to vote? So that kind of what belonging is. I live in a place where, there are a lot of Jewish people where I live, which means that I will not be dealing with neighbor-to-neighbor anti-Semitism, as unfortunately, a lot of Jewish people in America are dealing with right now.
Yes.
But I also live in a place where there is not that much of diversity yet. Yeah. Which also means that I can have neighbor-to-neighbor exchange where the assumption will be made that I am a racist and I should be in on the joke. So there are all kinds of ways of figuring out where and how do we belong, and how my children belong here is very different from how I belong. Yeah, how my grandchildren belong here is also very different. My granddaughter, who is now, scary to say, 18, when she was maybe 4 or 5, heard me speak in Russian to my daughter, and she said, Grandma, you speak Russian? I said, sure. What can you say in Russian? I said, yeah, I can say anything in Russian. What can you say in Russian? And she says to me, you know, like little kids can be very serious. She says, I don't speak Russian. I speak regular. And, you know, coming from a little kid, I love it. As an interculturalist, I love it because it really is a great illustration of how people tend to believe that their way of being, doing, behaving, speaking is regular.
Right.
And every one of us has our own regular way.
Normal.
You know,
Yeah.
any one of us. It's just the problem is that my regular and your regular are different. And how do we negotiate that space?
Like when people say, "Oh, I love your accent," and I say, "That's the first time I've ever had anybody tell me I've got an accent." You sound, but you have an accent too. You have an American accent, and then they say, "Oh no, I don't have an accent." That's the I don't have an accent. I'm like, that's the same thing. I'm regular, you know. And of course my accent is something that they love, but other accents is maybe not something that they love. So they're willing to voice it to me because it's an accent that they might have some sort of affinity for, but a more negative bias comes in and they wouldn't maybe say it at all, especially here in the Midwest where it's, you know, it's a little bit more polite.
Well, I will tell people when they have an issue with my accent. If I'm in a cantankerous mood, I will say, well, it might just be a sign that I speak one more language that is not within your regular. So, but I'm careful which battles I pick because that may not be very empathetic.
You know, I had once the most unexpected conversation around that. Was a few years ago in the wonderful place that many of us know and love, with Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication, where we used to go for years. I had an exchange in the cafeteria there with a young Black woman who was working there. So she was giving me my food, and I was first asking her for food. So she heard my accent and she asked about it. I said, my accent is, you know, from Russia. And she said, I so much envy people who have accents. I said, why? This was really new. I said, why? She said, you know, my family and I came from Somalia. And everyone in my family has an accent, even my younger brother, and I don't. Kind of my assumption is she probably has a very good musical ear, and she came here young enough, so she really picked up whatever local American language, you know.
The regular language, right? Yeah.
And she said, and I said, so what's the problem? She says, nobody ever asks me, where are you from? So many people struggle with constantly being asked, where are you from? But here is the person who never is asked. So a lot of her story then never comes into the space unless she pushes it into the space. So it's really, really interesting how differently different people relate to the same kind of reality.
And I found the link to that talk. It's Tatyana Fertelmeyster. I don't know. And we put that link into the TED Talk because that is one that I've got stored on my computer. It's one that I share with people because, you know, Kelly McLeod-Chingan, you know, she I guess brought that first to a CETA conference and showed it. So I've always got that there, but I couldn't remember the name. But it's a great talk. It is. Where are you local? That is a great question. So yeah, it's fantastic. Well,
and in this talk, she is asking some very specific questions that I think will be very useful for anybody who is listening to our conversation today and chooses to watch this TED Talk, to then ask themselves. She's asking about what are your relationships, rituals, and restrictions that are connected to different cultures that you are a part of and different places where you see to yourself as a local or would like to be local. You know, what are the rituals, relationships, and restrictions?
Yeah.
I will put that on my watch list immediately.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was lovely to hear your story this way. I haven't heard it told this way, and I want to express my gratitude, because I can only imagine that sometimes going back to that memory of being and having to make these moves may not always be pleasant to go back on memory lane. So I thank you for allowing us to lead you there, and glad we're back in the present day where I personally admire your activism and your passion in making it work, making it right for those who go through that process today. And your passion resonates through your voice, through your entire being, and thank you for sharing this with us today.
My pleasure.
And if we want to find you, Tatyana, where is the best place to find the wonderful Tatyana? I mean, in many places, but I use the image of the episode here as Connecting Differences, and that is your company name. I used that because I thought it was great. But so, what is the website?
The website for my company is connectingdifferences.com.
Right.
It's also very easy to find me just by my name, Tatyana Fertelmeyster, on LinkedIn.
Yep.
That's the easiest probably way to connect with me directly.
Wonderful.
As you're watching this on LinkedIn, you also, if you look up above this, where the text block is there, it's clickable. Tatyana's name is clickable. Just do that, and you found her. Excellent. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Christina in Italy, who's been watching and making some very valid comments. Sorry we didn't pick up on them and bring them into the conversation. Christina said that it's often difficult for refugees to have their training and job qualifications recognized abroad, which you alluded to or circled around.
That's a huge waste of human capital, speaking business language.
Right.
Huge waste.
So thank you everybody for watching. Give us a like, whatever the symbol on your social media tool is. Let us know that you like this. Give us a comment, give us a shout out, share this with your network.
Oh, Christian's frozen. That's it.
That must be the end of the program then.
Program. We're still, yeah. Well, yes, I will add to that. Thank you again, Tatyana, and again for all the wonderful. I mean, you are just so generous with your knowledge everywhere you go, and you and I have been in different parts of the world where I've seen you present, and you are a captivating speaker in the way that you deliver, and especially with the humor. This is something unexpected from a Russian person. Imagine a Russian person having humor, and which is fun for me also. But thank you very much for
every occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And that's episode 139 in the can, everybody. And we will be back tomorrow, Friday, with another episode. And join us then. And thank you, Tatyana, again. And I hope to see you in real life soon, even though we're only 10 minutes away from each other.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Brett.